All right, so many of you have already seen the first episode of the Indianapolis Pro Weekend, where my wife competed in Bikini and she placed 8th out of 17 girls, I believe. And she did great. She was, she continues to get better and better, learning more about her body. And that was a good show for her. Her goal was to be top 10 and she was 8th, so good for her. I also had Michael Ergis and Jake Wilson. Mike looked phenomenal. He was shredded. He was big. I promised I wouldn't use the term overlooked because he doesn't like that term. My wife yelled at me for using that term. I don't know why, but that's a matter of the fact. I guarantee you, if he got a call out, a favorable call out, where he got a chance to stand next to some of the guys that placed in front of him, that he could have beaten them. Ultimately, when I'm looking at the show, the top 5 guys in the 212, it became a taper show. Each one of these guys was like this, wide shoulders to tiny waist. Everyone from Ahmad to Muhammad Sadani to Jacob Wilson, who I also helped, who was unbelievable. I think he could have won and nobody would have blinked an eye. Even Charles Dixon, who, a lot of people say he's blocky, but he's wide as he is tall. So he still has a wacky taper, particularly in that rear lat spread. That's where Guy Sestanino missed the boat. He's not super wide. He has a tight waist, but he doesn't have a crazy taper. And that's where he was the odd man out there. So he ended up in 6th, I believe. And that's something I would have liked to seen Ergis stand next to Guy. I would have liked to seen him stand next to anyone in that second call-out group. It was a great lineup. It was a great show. So you had Charles Dixon winning, Jacob Wilson second. You had the return of the Matador, Silvio Samuel. Anyone who wasn't there might have not been impressed by him. I was very impressed by him. He still has those round muscle bellies, albeit a little smaller. He's probably 7 or 8 pounds smaller than he was when he was at his best. That says a lot after being gone for almost a decade. I thought he looked phenomenal. He was great condition. His legs weren't bad. They weren't as giant as when he was competing. He just needs fullness. He needs a little more time back. His condition was really good. So he's going to be dangerous with a little more time under his belt. 4th, I believe, was Sadani, who's got one of those beautiful physiques. I mean, as wide as his shoulders are, I can't believe how tiny his waist is. It's crazy. He could use a little more leg sweep and a little more muscle maturity, a little more conditioning, and he too will be crazy. Ahmad's been around a long time now. Another great physique. I think had he been like 2% tighter, just a little tighter, he would have probably leapfrogged over Sadani. And he's someone who can, and I think eventually will be winning shows like this. Not too long ago he was only 190 pounds, 195 pounds, and I still think he's way under the limit. So he can put on some size and do very well in this league, in this division. Outside of the top 6, as I said, I had Mike Ergis. We had a lot of good guys. A few that we've seen before. It's so hard to judge, so I'll go on to the open class. The open class was won by Steve Kuklo, and Steve looked unbelievable. Again, you can't go by those pictures. Pictures online were terrible. I would say Jake Wilson was the hardest guy in the show between Jake and Roman Fritz. And even pictures of them, they didn't look in shape. So you can't go by pictures. But Steve was unbelievable. He was so big and full. Like his front lat spread was just bubbles, chest and shoulders and arms, and he's got huge legs, huge calves. He needs a little more density in the back. But again, he's so wide. His frame is so big that it's going to take time. He's only 31 years old. Man, I was still competing in the NPC when I was 31. So he's got so much time in front of him to put on that density, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him win the Arnold Classic next year, or start winning some bigger shows. So good for him. Congratulations to him. Second place was a total beast, who's a budding superstar, Charles Griffin. And I got to speak to him, and man, I met him at the Nationals 2 years ago when he won, 3 years ago. And even then, he was an intense dude, and you could tell he loves competing and training and doing whatever it takes to get better. And man, has he gotten better. He's put on something like 35 pounds of muscle since he turned pro. And every ounce of it is quality. I told him he reminds me a little bit of William Bonac, the type of muscle he has. It's just so full and crazy looking. As he puts a little more on his legs, he's got good legs, but he could use a little more sweep and like 2% more conditioning. And man, I would have had no problem with him beating Steve, And when they first came out, I'm like, oh, Griffin's got this. And then as Steve got into it, and particularly in the evening show when he did his posing routine, and Steve just ran away with it after that. But it was very close, and Griffin is one to watch out for sure. Third was Luke Sandow, who's another beast. Perfect shape, perfect shoulder caps, pecs, arms, small waist, big back, big everything. He's another one who's just maturing. His body needs a little time, a little seasoning, and he's going to be nasty. It's funny, so many people say bodybuilding's dying and this and that. That's crap. We get some really, really talented young guys coming up that are awesome, and Luke and Griffin and Kuklo, that top three right there. And guess what? Top four was Ian Valliere, who was absolutely bananas. He's another young kid. Tiny waist, big sweeping thighs, big back. He's got everything. He just needs a little more seasoning himself, a little more condition. He's going to be nuts. It's so fun to watch. In the audience was Nathan Deasha, another young guy who's crazy like a cartoon. So bodybuilding is exciting. It's the future is very exciting, and I look forward to seeing all these guys get better and seeing these matchups, head-to-head matchups, and seeing what they bring to the Olympia. So Ian was fourth. Fifth was I'm doing this all on the top of my head. Fifth was Luis Rodriguez, who's another one. Crazy structure. Some of the most wacky arms in the sport right now. In his shape is tremendous. Tiny waist, great taper. He's got everything. He could use a tad bit more legs. I've seen his legs have come up, but the conditioning went down a little. So all he needs to do is get sharper, and he'll be winning shows like this. That whole top five were all young crew from 33 years and under. which in bodybuilding is young. And then, so outside of that, you had, I think Luke Sando, Roman Fritz was 6th. Hide was 7th. And Freddie Smalls was 8th. All represented themselves well. Roman might have been a bit flat. I spoke to him afterwards, and he's one of those guys who peeled at 260 and then brought himself down to 240. He's really afraid to come in full because he doesn't think he's sharp enough. But the guy's crazy, and he, at his height, he's almost just about 6 feet. He needs to be fuller, particularly standing next to some of the bigger guys. So I'd like to see him come in closer to 260, and it would be a different ball game. Hide was a little smidge off maybe from his Arnold, Ohio look. It's hard to travel. Hide went from Ohio to Australia and back, and it's hard to hold that condition, which he did hold pretty well. But in a really good lineup like this was, it's every little bit counts. Nobody would have shaken their head if Hide was 5th, really, or if he was 6th. But it wasn't that big a deal that it, I would have liked to seen him compared with more people. Freddie, it's the same Freddie. He's huge, round, full muscle bellies. The condition was, could have been better. And he's another one. When he nails his condition, he's good in any lineup. But that wasn't the case this weekend. Of course, he won Best Poser Award, which he always does. Most entertaining. He's very entertaining. So that's about it. It was a great weekend overall. I had one guy who was 2nd, Jacob Wilson. Mike Ergis, who was his first show in a couple years. And Mike's 49 years old. The guy looks incredible. So I'm very happy and proud and honored to be able to work with those guys. And my wife as well, Michaela Marie, she looked great, and as I said, represented herself very well, as did everyone there. So it was a great weekend, a great show, amazing first show for Dave Bowers. Congratulations to Dave for putting on a great show and packing the house. Everyone was pleased. It was a great little city. Indianapolis was really cool. Lots of cool restaurants and things to see, and very clean. A very low population. It seemed like next to nobody lived there. So that was my take on the Indy Pro. And keep an eye out we have a ton of videos coming out from this weekend. Lots of shenanigans, lots of footage, stage footage, and night before, morning of, dinner, things like that. So keep an eye out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.
Alright, this is the Boston Mass. Thanks again for watching. Now, if you're not subscribing, subscribe now. Tell all your friends to subscribe. If you haven't, do it now. Alright?